Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And we want to welcome you back to another TechStrong Learning experience. My name is Jared, and again, welcome back to TechStrong Learning. As always, this session is going to be recorded and made available afterwards on demand. Please send all of your questions to the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen and join us in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from, share your experience, your comments, your understanding on the matter. We want to hear from you. We want to engage with you throughout this discussion. You have a resource panel on the left side of your screen for some additional materials and handouts for you. And finally, before we get this kicked off, I just want to let you know there will be two $50 Amazon gift cards after today's session. So be sure to send in your comments, your questions, and fill out the survey to become eligible for this. Let's go ahead and kick off today's topic. We've got a realist approach to least privileged in the cloud. We're joined with Jeff Moncrief, Field CTO and Head of Sales Engineering at Sonri Security. Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you while I turn my camera off. Uh-oh, Jeff, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
There we go. I see you. All right, take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started here. Let's see here. All right. So as Jared said, my name is Jeff Moncrief. I'm the Field CTO here at Sonri Security. And I've been here at Sonri Security for about 4 years. I'm out of Atlanta, Georgia. And I appreciate everyone joining us today. This is a topic that I live and breathe every single day. So it's super near and dear to my heart, but it's also something that I think, I know, I've learned a lot about over my 4 years here at Sonri, where we've just been focusing on securing the identity fabric across the public cloud. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of show you, I'm going to fast ramp you kind of what I've through all the school of hard knocks that I've gone through over the years here, and really try and help everyone understand a way that we can actually try and tackle least privilege in the public cloud. We all hear about least privilege, and least privilege had a lot of definitions to different people. And then we have worked with incredible amounts of customers, small and big, that have struggled with least privilege in the public cloud. And we're going to talk about why that is. So this is not going to be a big product pitch or anything like that. We're going to be spending the majority of the time talking about how you can practically adopt some strategies to actually, for the first time ever, be successful with a strategy that's going to lead to obtaining least privilege in the public cloud. I will show at the end a very brief demo of Sonri's flagship product, which is the world's first cloud permissions firewall that's designed to automate a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. But again, that's not the big takeaway. The big takeaway I want for today is everyone to understand that there's an approach that we've learned through trial and error here at Sonri that really allows you to be successful at obtaining least privilege. All right. The first thing that we want to talk about, though, is just the state of affairs in the public cloud environments that we plug into here at Sonri. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about AWS, Azure, or GCP. With any public cloud environment that has any sort of maturity to it. And when I say maturity, I'm talking about, you've got a tenant with multiple subscriptions and several workloads in it, or you've got an organization with multiple OUs with workloads in them, with development and production and UAT and staging type accounts or subscriptions or projects in them. You're going to have a significant problem when it comes to identities in the public cloud. And when we talk about identities, we're talking about both person as well as non-person identities. And what we have uncovered over the years is, and I don't say this lightly, it's an identity crisis in the public cloud with service accounts, service principals, managed identities, roles, cross-account trusts. It's basically the Wild West. And what this presents is an insurmountable problem to organizations because they don't know where to start. It seems like an absolutely overwhelming problem once they get a CNAPP or a KIM tool, which is what Sonri's been doing for years now, is providing visibility into the identity fabric and helping folks see just what that risk landscape looks like, but they don't know where to start. And then you've got the issue that's just continual, where you have the application teams, the DevOps teams that just want to deploy more things quicker, faster, with less roadblocks, less restrictions. And then you have the security teams, and their job is to come in and clean up the mess. And it's a constant battle. And it's very, very difficult, we've learned over the years, to be successful at this from a strategy perspective. The vast majority of the tooling on the market today, the overwhelming majority of the tooling on the market today, to be honest with you, is visibility. They're going to give you visibility into what's out there, living and breathing, what's orphaned. I call this cyber litter, cyber garbage, all the stuff that's just sitting out there that you don't know what it's needed for, you don't know who deployed it, when it was deployed, and you're scared to death to delete it. And the majority of the tools, they just show you that you have this problem, and good luck going and fixing it by hand. And the majority of these tools tell you to go fix it by hand by focusing on the individual identities themselves. Okay. Today's session is about fundamentally flipping that mindset. We've learned here over the years that focusing on getting 3,000 identities to least privilege and figuring out whether or not you can safely delete another 100 or 1,000 identities, you're never going to get there. It's a pipe dream. Okay. You're focusing on the spokes themselves instead of the hub. And that's the flip that I want us all to walk away with today. Stop focusing on those individual identities, because you're never going to get there. At scale and any sort of maturity in the public cloud, it is an endless battle. And even if you were able to get to a point where you were able to actually get 2,000 identities to least privilege by writing policies and putting those policies on every single one of those, by the time you got done with that day that you finish, you got to start all over again, because the cloud's ephemeral and the problem just never ends. So there's got to be a better way. All right. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. What we're going to talk about is 4 things that I want you to focus on when it comes to a different mindset for least privilege in the public cloud. Okay. These are things that you can do today to actually make big dents in the risk landscape across the identity fabric. Doesn't matter if we're talking about Azure, AWS, or GCP. It's kind of the same thing in all 3. We all know the plumbing's a little bit different. The use cases, the takeaways, and the outcomes are exactly the same. And what you're going to want to have is a mindset where you're focused on the unused part of the public cloud. Okay. The vast majority of what we've seen here over the years at Sunry, and what I've seen, is that you look at crazy identity change, you look at attack paths, you look at lateral movement scenarios through the identity fabric, not through the network, through the identity fabric. Okay. The vast majority of the points along those chains are unused. And that's a big deal. Okay. Because when you remove and attack the unused part of your public cloud, it removes huge chunks of risk in general. But B, those attack paths and those chains, they collapse. Okay. It's fascinating to see what happens when you just actually attack the unused part of your cloud. Then what you're left with is the running part of your cloud that you can then double down on, right? As it relates to zero trust least privilege, where you don't allow gets and describes and writes. Totally get that. No problem. But for the vast majority of the risk landscape that's out there today in your public cloud environments, it's a huge chunk of unused risk, unused services, unused regions, unused identities, and then most certainly unused permissions. And, it's not a dirty little secret or anything like that, but when you go and you create, a new Azure environment or AWS environment, you have full access to hundreds of services because they're all turned on by default. Those regions are all available, right? It's all turned on and enabled, but the vast majority of that area, surface area, if you will, is not used. But it's a risk landscape that you have to worry about because it can be used maliciously against you. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today, right? There's 4 primary kind of things that we want to do to attack this unused part of the public cloud. All right, the first is what we call restricting unused sensitive permissions. Okay, this is crucial. Okay, because across the 3 cloud service providers, we've learned, and through our research here at Sunry, we've learned that there's over 40,000 permissions. Okay, 43,000 according to this slide, but the number is constantly changing, as far as it's going up constantly every week. That is a tremendous amount of permissions that you are trying to understand whether or not every single role, service principal, or identity, whether it's a local IAM identity or a federated identity, needs to have access to. And imagine trying to do that across thousands of identities and sometimes dozens or hundreds of accounts in one particular public cloud. It is a daunting and unachievable task to focus on 43,000 identities. All right, and that's pretty much where the market's been the last 4 or 5 years. We're just treating them all the same, and we're going to show you what's used and unused, and we're going to recommend a least privilege policy, and we're going to give you the JSON, and you got to go put it on that identity. And then tomorrow, you might have to change it again. But what we've learned here is the vast majority of folks that we talk to are not worried about 40,000 non-dangerous identities, okay? What they're concerned about is the 3,000 permissions across the 3 cloud service providers that are dangerous. Of those 3,000, you take AWS, for instance, only 900 of the permissions in AWS are dangerous. And when I say dangerous, I'm talking map to MITRE tactics, permissions that are mapped to the kill chain. Okay, so things that are related to, from a theoretical or a thought leader perspective, as the kill chain is related, or MITRE, reconnaissance, persistence, lateral movements, privilege escalation, and then data exfiltration or achieving your objective, right? In a more practical standpoint, I'm talking about creating NAT gateways, deleting internet gateways, turning off audit logging, CloudTrail, right? Things that should never happen, or they should only be used by a very select few individuals, okay? It significantly reduces the workload when you think about, okay, I really only need to protect a certain number of permissions across these different services, okay? It makes it something that's much more achievable, okay? You're still gonna have to be writing policies by hand, all right? That's just the nature of the beast. Depending on the different cloud service providers, all of them have different mechanisms, but like in AWS, for instance, you're going to be having to write service control policies. You're going to be doing resource policies. You're going to be doing CMPs or customer managed policies, okay? You're going to have to write those, but it is giving you a way to whittle it down in a way that's a little bit more manageable, okay? And if we look at, some scenarios, so we have a customer that is, I don't even want to say what they're, I'll just say they're in the Fortune 1000, okay? And they have been giving out EC2 star permissions for years to their developers. They have hundreds of developers. And the reason is because they had no clue which permissions to give to these individuals. As far as slicing and dicing for true least privilege with the, really EC2 has so many permissions, well over 100 something, and they just didn't know. And a different approach now that we're helping them with is to give everyone access to the permissions that are not sensitive, and then to restrict access through policies to the permissions that are sensitive, right? So deleting internet gateways, creating new ingress security group rules that would put the business at danger. Those are the ones that we're protecting, and only a very few individuals have access to those. So that way we don't have to go, write 300 least privilege policies. We actually only write one policy with a few configs in it that says that everyone can use the permissions except for this, 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 and this, and only a select 1 or 2 identities, person or non-person, have access to use these permissions. Again, you're doing it by hand, okay? It is somewhat flexible because you have to, again, update that policy as the business needs change and other folks need access to those sensitive permissions. But it is fundamentally a way that you can start to easily restrict parts of your cloud that are being used and get them to least privilege by focusing on permissions that actually can hurt the business. The next thing that we want to attack, okay, is unused identities. And this is probably my favorite use case just because this is what I've seen over the years, the almost every single one of the folks that I've worked with struggle with. All right. And that is, what do I do about all this cyber litter and cyber garbage that's sitting out there? I've got all these roles, all these identities, all these different things, if you will, service accounts, access keys, etc., that my Kim, my CSPM, my CNAP, whatever your tool of choice is telling me I haven't been used in 90 days, 6 months, 11 months. I'm still scared to death to delete it. There is absolutely no doubt about it. I've seen this over and over and over again. Folks are scared to death to delete things from their cloud. There's this paralyzation, and guess what? I get it, because I would have it too. And I know you all know what I'm talking about. You don't want to delete something that's going to break some critical business application that needs that identity next week, right? And in order to safely try and delete all these different unused artifacts and orphan things that your visibility tool of choice may expose, you've got to do research on every single one of those. Okay, who created it? Why was it created? When was the last time it was used? And is there any way that the business needs it moving forward? And what we have seen over the years, you may successfully, secure several hundred, possibly 1,000 of those unused identities and delete them because you were able to get to that point. But it's going to take anywhere from 6 months to 12 months to get to that point. And then you just got to do it again and again and again. We've also seen it where when you actually delete something, it's actually needed. And we'll tell you what I mean by that here on the next slide. But at the end of the day, there's got to be a better way, okay, than just your tool saying you got to go delete all these unused things and putting that on the to-do list as the number one priority. Instead, what if you were able to quarantine all that unused stuff, right? What if you were able to put it in identity jail? Okay, that's what I'm talking about here. Writing a policy that simply says you cannot do anything right now. Okay, we're just going to block you. You can't do anything. You can't use any of your entitlements because we don't know if you're needed. Okay, that's going to secure the business from the risk of those identities sitting out there. Because up until this point in time, the vast majority of the organizations that I've worked with, they just accept the risk because they don't know, and they're not thinking of, I don't have to delete this identity. Maybe there's a way I can keep it there and just put a layer of protection around it, sandboxing essentially through writing policies across the different cloud service providers that would actually protect the business from that being used. If it's needed, yes, the application might, not function or whatever, but someone's going to come to you and be like, what happened? I need this identity, and you can just quickly adjust the policy. Of course, you're doing it by hand to allow those permissions to be used and granted, and you didn't break anything, right? But it removes significant amounts of risk quickly as it relates to all of those unused identities. Now, this last bullet here, rewaking upon, requires tooling. We're going to talk about that when I show you the permissions firewall, which is what's great about automating a lot of the stuff that you would otherwise be doing by hand that we're talking about here. Right, but just some examples of zombie identities, right? Old break glass accounts that you don't know whether or not they're needed. If a role hasn't been used in 6 months, but it's required by a critical voice over IP application, that's actually a real customer story of mine. And again, the takeaway here is that vast amount of risk associated with unused identities. I want you all to have a mindset that you don't have to delete everything. Okay, there's a way to quickly today, like literally today, Thursday, remove the risk with those identities by actually writing a policy that says that they just can't be used right now. Okay, there's ways that we can go about protecting the environment without deleting them. Then we've got, the other two big use cases, which are just truly huge unused parts of the public cloud. And what I mean by that is, you go in and you create a new AWS organization or an Azure subscription with a tenant or, a Google project. You have access to all of those services. Why? Because the cloud service providers want you adopting new services. That's how they make money, right? Through the shared responsibility model, it's your responsibility to figure out what you do and don't want to use and to secure it, right? But the vast majority of folks that I've worked with over the years, they actually just leave all that on. It's enabled, it's turned on, and they're not thinking from a proactive standpoint. You know what? All of these services, there's like 330 in AWS, for instance. My business only uses 20 of them. My business only uses 40 of them. That's a huge risk landscape that's just sitting out there turned on. That either someone inside my organization or a compromised credential could get leveraged, and someone starts deploying things left and right across these different services that is just absolutely going to put the business at risk. It's going to create new ingress, egress points and all that stuff, right? Just turn it off. Through a simple policy, you can turn off access to all those services. Okay, you can do it across the entire company. You can limit access just to different teams and just restrict it at different scopes. Again, you're writing these policies by hand. I know that, right? That it is a manual effort. It's also concrete, right? It's inflexible because you're going to have to go change those by hand. But it is a way to truly remove the risk quickly with the unused part of the public cloud that's turned on. Okay. And if we think about a couple of scenarios, so Sunry, we are cloud native, built from the ground up inside AWS. All right. We only use 20 of the 320 services that are inside AWS. I, as a security engineer, as a cloud ops engineer at Sunry, I don't want to have to deal with folks using Direct Connect to create a VPN tunnel back to their house. We don't use it. I don't want folks in SageMaker, which is a phenomenal, AI machine learning capability. I don't want them creating pre-signed URLs, exposing my data straight out to the internet. Same thing with like AWS Ground Station. Folks, 95% of the world does not need to be using AWS Ground Station, which controls satellites in space. And the other thing is with unused services, it's not just risk from a security standpoint. It is a huge, equal, if not bigger risk from a cost standpoint. These services cost money, big money. And before you know it, you've got engineers that are piddling around with different services that haven't been used yet, or maybe it's a new one that's just been released because no one's blocking access to them through a policy. And then all of a sudden, you've got a $50,000 bill from some new AI service, like Bedrock, in AWS, that someone was poking around playing with, and they just left it on, right? So there's a way to remove that risk easily, quickly, and safely by writing policies and controlling which services can and cannot be turned on. I think the other big thing about services is folks aren't realizing that you can't do anything in these services without the identity fabric. The identity fabric controls everything across the platform. In a cloud native world, everything lives, breathes, and functions through IAM. So when we're thinking about IAM, don't look at IAM as just something that controls users and permissions. Look at IAM as the plumbing. It is the entire network infrastructure with which all of these services communicate. So with IAM, with least privilege, you have to be thinking about services equally as important as you are those individual person and non-person identities, because IAM controls that as well. And then lastly, regions. Okay. Regions is super important because the vast majority of folks do not use all 30 something regions that are available in one of the particular cloud service providers, but they're all turned on by default. And it leaves a place for shadow IT, folks that don't want to see folks that are, folks that don't want to see, others see what they might be testing. But more importantly, it leaves, a huge area for a bad actor to come in and run up costs and those kinds of things. Denial of wallet attacks are real. Okay. And again, through writing policies, through the cloud service providers, you can quickly turn off access to all of these different unused regions. Okay. And, you get into situations like cross-geo data transfers, HIPAA violations. It's incredible the trouble that you can get into by not implementing this control. Again, it's by hand, but if you kind of think about big picture, you turn off all the regions that you're not using. You turn off all of those hundreds of services that you're probably not using, certainly not across the entire organization. You quickly, safely just put all of those unused identities in identity jail instead of deleting them. And then you restrict access on the services that are being used to just a few identities that actually need access to what we call sensitive permissions or dangerous permissions or permissions that would put the company at risk or in danger. It is incredible to see what happens with like a CIM tool, Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management, or maybe a CNAP tool that claims to do Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. Those identity chains collapse. It's fascinating. If you kind of think about like a risk landscape across the identity fabric at 100%, when you do these four things, it takes that 100% of the risk landscape and shrinks it down to less than 10%. That's a fact. Think about that. Then you can actually focus your efforts on the running cloud and not a bunch of noise that's caused because it's a huge amount of unused surface area in the public cloud, and it's all intertwined and enabled and turned on through the identity fabric that's creating this identity crisis that I showed you when we started the presentation. Okay, so that's four things that you can do. Now I'm going to quickly share, let's see here, I'm gonna stop sharing, and we're gonna share a different screen. We're gonna do a quick little demo here, okay? All right, so hopefully everyone can see this screen here. This is the world's first cloud permissions firewall. It is a bold product that we have just released here at Sunry Security, and it is meant to 1000% directly attack this pain point that we all have been feeling for years with trying to fix the problem that I just set up for you and showed you by hand. Okay, there is a definite strategy here, but it is a manual one where you have to write controls, you have to write SCPs, you have to write condition statements, you have to write boundary statements. And customers that we've talked to over and over and over the years have said there's got to be a better way to help us fix this mess than just showing us the risk landscape. Again, that's huge. A huge part of that is unused, right? That led us to go back to the drawing board about a year ago, and we created this incredible platform called the Permissions Firewall. Okay, the Permissions Firewall is designed to quickly illuminate this attack surface, okay, and quickly help you take huge chunks of risk away from it, okay? And it is all about action, not just visibility. It plugs into your AWS or Azure or GCP environment, and within a day, it illuminates these four areas that we just talked about, the unused permissions attack surface, okay? And you can see regions, services, zombies, and right here you've got IAM users that have access to sensitive permissions that are not using them, all right? And you can see here, very much like a firewall. It looks like a firewall with rule sets across the different services. It has a default deny that it puts into play, but essentially it takes over all of the policy writing for you so that you don't have to write all of this stuff by hand. The most beautiful part of this capability is that it is actually flexible and it changes as you have different needs and demands for permissions moving forward. And it's got a very clever capability that we call permissions on demand. And to kind of show you what that looks like here, if I poke into EC2, right? EC2, I think we're all familiar with it, so it's a good service to call out. EC2's got 44 sensitive permissions that the firewall is tracking, right? This kind of makes it a little bit more tangible and realistic when we're talking about sensitive permissions, things with persistence, initial access, data exfiltration, right? We're talking about deleting VPC endpoints, deleting NAT gateways, those kinds of things, right? We don't care about gets and describes and lists, all right? We want to protect those services so that our developers can develop safely without putting the business at risk. If there are any identities that need to use those sensitive permissions, our analytics automatically find that for you. And we recommend those as exemptions. You can add your own exemptions here if you want. But the idea is the firewall is designed to come in and protect those services, all right? And we know that the cloud is ephemeral, it's going to change. But what happens when you click protect is it directly goes after those sensitive permissions. And you might have 2 users here that are using them, but you might have several hundred person and non-person identities that have access to that environment. And by clicking that one button, you have implemented a single policy where the firewall is orchestrating it for you that restricts access to those sensitive permissions. Now, we know that something is going to need access to those permissions, so I'm going to show you what this looks like here. I'm going to pop back into share a different screen, and we're going to show you what this looks like. Okay, this is AWS. Okay, I think we all know what AWS looks like. The web console, logging in. I'm going to log in as Sneaky Jeff. It's me, kind of a funny little name with myself. Sneaky Jeff is not an exemption, and I have protected EC2 with the firewall at that particular scope. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into EC2. I'm going to go into security groups. I am going to open up a security group and try and edit an inbound rule, which is exactly what we were talking about here, a sensitive permission. I'm going to try and add a rule. I'm going to add an RDP rule to this particular security group and try and save it. Look what happens. It's blocked. The firewall blocked it. Okay. You didn't have to go write any policies. You didn't have to write SCPs. The firewall is doing this in real time. We're not adding anything to your cloud. We are orchestrating cloud native controls so that you, for the first time ever, can actually secure this landscape in a matter of days, quickly and safely. But we know that these kinds of things are going to happen. So we've got a really, really neat chat ops capability built in. We send a message in real time instantly. If someone tries to use one of those sensitive permissions, we send it to an approver, and you have a lot of flexibility with who approves what here in the system. But we send the messages over Slack, over Teams, over email. And you can see right here that Sneaky Jeff was just denied access. Sneaky Jeff tried to create that ingress rule. Do you want to approve it or deny it? You can deny it, and it'll send Jeff a message that says, nope, you're not allowed to do that. Sorry, you're not an admin. If you want to, you can add a note and say, hey, that's no problem, right? You just click approve. And at that point in time, you come back in, retry. There you go. Crucial. This workflow works in the firewall for both sensitive permissions that are needed as well as zombies that wake up. Okay. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go back over into real quick, and we'll finish up here. And I'm going to show you about, particular zombies. Let's see here. All right. So we're back in the firewall now, right? So zombies, right? Remember I talked about quickly, safely quarantining those unused identities. Now, you would have to do this again by writing policies by hand. And you can see just in this demo system, the different zombies that we have. Some haven't been used in 6 months. Some haven't been used in a year. Some we've been tracking for a long time and they've never been used, but folks are still scared to death to delete them. And again, it takes time. It takes time to research. It takes time to delete. We don't have to deal with any of that here. Here, we just click the quarantine button and it instantly puts them in identity jail. They can't use those entitlements until they try and wake up. And when they wake up, it's going to trigger permissions on demand request. One of the cool features about this is that we don't allow it to wake up until you approve it, which is a net new capability because it could be an indicator of compromise, right? And the next thing that we've got is unused services and regions. And these are pretty self-explanatory. It's just the same thing that we were talking about in the slides. You have all these unused services either across your entire cloud estate or, I'll pick a sandbox, right? You have all these unused services in a sandbox. You can just disable all of the unused services at any particular scope, and then instantly all those policies are written for you in one global policy, and that risk landscape is completely removed from the table. Same thing with regions, and you just flip them on and off here. It's truly remarkable because this is designed to really, really alleviate the problem that the entire market has had over the years with trying to get to least privilege by writing everything by hand and focusing on the spokes. Here we focus on the hub itself, anything that's new out there, manual identity or maybe it's an identity that comes from Terraform, something like that. It's going to inherit our default deny. It's truly, truly, just a great product. So that's it for the firewall. I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go back into the slide deck. Let's see here. Here we go. All right. Now, things to remember, takeaways. Okay. Yes, I'm excited about the firewall, but I mean, I've been living this pain for years trying to help customers. So, I mean, that is what it is. But things to remember from a takeaway standpoint, from a strategy perspective for all of you. Okay, not all permissions are created equal. Okay, we are focusing on protecting those permissions across the identity fabric. That is the hub. Quit thinking about securing the spokes. I promise you, you will never be successful at it, and it is going to drive you mad. And what's going to happen is you're just going to stick your head in the sand. And you're going to say, I can't deal with it. It's too much. I'd rather just close the door and not know about it. There's a different way to do it. Focus on the hub with protecting just those sensitive permissions. When it comes to unused things, it is not a mindset of you have to delete, you have to delete, you have to delete. Deleting is fine, right? Cleaning up is great. But from a risk perspective, there is a way to get rid of that risk today. And that is just to say you can't do anything until I tell you that you can do it, okay? Through writing policies. Non-person identities do compose the vast majority of your threat. Non-person identities we've seen here often outnumber person identities 10 to 1. So think about that. So we're talking about securing identities. I'm talking machine accounts. I'm talking Terraform roles. I'm talking roles that do other things. So that if you think about the typical lateral movement chain that an identity risk tool is going to show you, it's going to show you that you can jump from one role into another role. That role, because of cross account trust, allows you to jump into another role into another account. And again, almost all that's unused, right? But that's where your threat landscape lives. And then unused services and regions, right? Think of those equally as dangerous as the actual identities themselves, because everything in regions and services is controlled through the identity fabric and policies that grant access, to and from those different services. Okay, so 4 things to take away. It is dead simple. If you are interested in the Sunry Cloud Permissions Firewall, you sign up for the free trial right on our website. We send you a login to a tenant. It is in monitor mode with just a roller permission. Very simple to plug in. It only takes 5 minutes into your public cloud environment. And then from there, you can start deploying controls and instantly removing risk. It's pretty slick. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing altogether. And I'm going to come back over to you, Jared, and see if there's been any questions that have come in.
Yeah, of course. We've got a few. First one is, what kind of forensics do you recommend for quarantined zombie identities?
What kind of forensics? I don't really know and understand what that question means by what kind of forensics for quarantining. I think that maybe the question is what kind of tooling will help me understand if it's safe to quarantine an identity, right? And what I mean by that is you're going to need a tool that tells you whether or not that identity has been used in the last 30, 60, 90, 120 days, right? There are KIM tools that do that. Sunry's been in the KIM market for years. That's what we've specialized in, is exposing those unused assets in the public cloud and resources. There's native tools like IAM Access Analyzer or Microsoft Entra. Even GCP has got a little, built-in utility when you're looking at users in IAM that are showing you, whether or not they've been used or whether or not they're over permission. But at the end of the day, you still have to go attach those policies by hand, right? They're giving you the visibility, but you've got to still go quarantine them by hand. So I would say from a visibility standpoint, I assume that's what you mean by forensics, that you would need a tool that's actually showing you whether or not those identities have been used in a certain period of time. There is native tooling, and then there's third-party tooling that does it more extensively from a governance perspective.
All right, great. And are there any other cloud providers you guys use to bring the software to?
Are there any other cloud providers that we use to bring the software to?
Let me reread that. Are there any other cloud providers you guys are going to bring this software to?
Oh, I see. Yes. So it fully supports AWS right now. We're very excited about that. And we are going to be supporting GCP in Q4, which is right around the corner. And Azure is going to be at the turn of the new year. And across those 3 cloud service providers, I think that we have plenty of work to do, to be honest with you. So right now, it's going to be the 3 usual suspects, Jared.
And what are some of the common challenges organizations face when trying to implement implement least privilege in the cloud environments?
Having to write things by hand. Okay. So, yes, you can get tooling that shows you incredible visibility, incredible risk. But at the end of the day, our customers have told us over and over and over again, we hit a massive roadblock when it comes to how the heck do we fix this mess? So, I'd say the biggest roadblock to achieving this is how do you do this at scale? How do you automate changes? How do you orchestrate and decentralize this down to those development teams with things like that permissions on demand capability that I just showed you with the firewall? Because at the end of the day, I mean, I was just at AWS Reinforce last week in Philadelphia. Okay. And I was working the booth. At the end of the day, it was beautiful to see folks coming up to me over and over and over saying, this addresses a massive pain point that I have. This is going to save me so much time. I've been having to write all of this by hand, and it is the biggest pain in the rear end, right? So I'd say the biggest obstacle, the biggest hurdle is automating this and orchestrating this at scale by hand. Totally achievable, but you're going to be living inside policies and JSON pretty much every day, depending on how big your cloud is, right? So I'd say that's the biggest hurdle.
All right, and the next one we've got is, do cloud providers provide unused permission scanning?
They do. They do. That would be like IAM Access Analyzer. That would be like the built-in GCP Analyzer. I know that Microsoft Entra does it. So the cloud providers absolutely do it. It is, listen, this is no disrespect to the cloud service providers because, they have 300 plus services that they're managing and offering up at any point in time. But I would say that they are a stopgap. They are very basic, primitive to get you some initial visibility. They're going to show you unused versus used permissions. They're going to show you things that haven't been used, right? And hey, you want to go delete all those unused identities, or do you want to quarantine them? And all of these, you might have several hundred identities that the cloud native tool is showing you are over permissioned. Do you want to go write several hundred least privilege policies? Right? Again, across all 40-something thousand permissions? Or do you really want to focus on permissions that are sensitive and protecting those? Again, not on the spokes, but at the hub itself.
And then we've got, when new services are added on, how soon does it come up in the app?
It's pretty much, so we're AWS partners, and we get early access to any services and the SDKs and all of that. So by the time a service reaches GA, it's already supported in our firewall. We've already figured out the sensitive permissions that are associated with it. You think about these new AI services, things like Bedrock. I think we support like 15 AI services now already that AWS has released. So it's pretty much instant. And then we've already got it in there. We figured out the sensitive permissions, mapped them to MITRE, and then you can start picking and choosing where you want to disable access to those services or where you do want to use them, where you can just protect.
Then it's a kind of a follow-up, I think, from the same person. How big is your typical customer and how many accounts?
Wow, it spans. So because we've been in this KIM market for years, over the years, because of KIM and regulations and audit requirements and compliance, we've got some big customers. Like, World Connect Services is one of our customers. They're a Fortune 100. They have thousands of accounts, right? We have a fintech that we've all heard of that is one of our customers. They've been one of our customers for over 3 years now. They have 5,000 to 6,000 accounts. Okay. But we also work with small to medium-sized businesses, which truly is who this product is designed for. It's designed for folks that don't have 10-person IAM teams. It's designed for folks that are kind of doing this with a very small team, and it's a daunting task to do this by hand because it just completely offloads all of that worry and just automates it all, right? So it really is, you can have 10 accounts or you can have 5,000 accounts, Jared. The firewall is kind of going to solve this pain point for anyone.
Sounds good. Do you integrate with Wiz?
Do we integrate with Wiz? That's an interesting question. No, we work alongside Wiz. Wiz is going to give you incredible visibility. Wiz has a beautiful interface, right? So folks definitely love Wiz. We don't play in Wiz's pond or anything like that, right? We play in our pond. And what we're going to do is make Wiz better, because we're going to reduce all the noise that Wiz doesn't have, the ability to really shut down. We've got multiple customers that we work with, Jared, that have us and Wiz. Now, everything that's in the firewall is built off the API endpoints. So programmatically, if you wanted to suck any data out of the firewall and integrate it into Wiz, you absolutely could, but we don't have like an official integration.
All right. So if you guys have more questions, keep them coming. We do have a few more. So someone said, I'm already writing SCPs by hand. How is this different from that?
You can put your pen down. You can stop typing, okay? We will write all of that for you. And the beautiful thing about the permissions on demand is that it allows the controls to flex and change in real time. And the other beautiful thing is that we have built this in a way that doesn't get into trouble with SCPs. SCPs are limited. We all know that. They have a very limited capacity, and we have built this in a way that it's compressed. And we have one master SCP, if you want to look at it that way. And then we decentralize policies and a lot of the controls that we then manipulate, and the levers that are doing the controls, the permits and denies in real time. We decentralize that a little bit into the children layer of the OU, so we don't get into trouble. So it's very lightweight from a room standpoint as far as how much room it takes up. But you don't have to write SCPs anymore. That is no longer a pain point for you. This does all of that for you with the initial set of controls, and it adjusts them all in real time with that permissions on demand capability through chat operations. It's truly beautiful.
So follow up to that, how can you check to make sure that your SCP strategy is actually working?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we're going to be showing you when we plug in the firewall, what does the unused surface look like? And we're going to be understanding any SCPs that are currently out there. And it's going to show you, I guess, if you think about it, it's just all the gaps, right? Where the SCPs are not protecting regions, not protecting services, and those kinds of things. And so we do take that into account. But I think the real takeaway for the customers that we work with is that, they can essentially do away with all of those controls once we have all of our controls in place, and let us automate and orchestrate all of that for you so that you no longer have to do that by hand.
All right. Well, unless there's more questions that come in the next minute or two, do you have any final remarks before we close out?
Again, I know that we've talked a lot about the firewall here in this Q&A, and I appreciate everyone letting me show it to you. That is something I'm very proud of and excited about. But from a takeaway perspective, again, the school of hard knocks, don't focus on the spokes, okay? Focus on the hub. Not all permissions are created equal. Be thinking about a safe way to not have to delete identities, but remove the risk associated with them, and be thinking about services and regions that are turned on and enabled by default, and that can be used maliciously against you, either from a security standpoint or a cost standpoint, and just turning it off. The takeaway is the vast majority of what's out there right now in your cloud is unused. Get rid of the unused, and it's amazing what you can then do by focusing on securing the running cloud. That's the takeaway.
All right. We actually had one question come in. Do you want to answer that?
Which question is it? I apologize. I don't see it.
Just came in. So it's is it hard to take a realistic, practical approach to least privilege access for larger organizations with many teams in different regions, or do
compromises need to be made? Yeah. All right. So in that scenario, this is Paul. Yeah. So Paul, I'd say this is where the pain really starts to hit home, is because that's going to be a much more mature cloud, right? And that's where you're going to have a lot more artifacts, a lot more orphan things that are sitting out there that you have to do investigations on. We have a fintech here that we've worked with our KIM tool. They've been a KIM customer for years of us, where we would expose across 5,000 accounts, orphaned identities, unused identities. And the last that we heard from them was, from a statistic standpoint, was it took them 10 months to get rid of 2,000 identities. right? And it's because they had to jump through so many hoops. They have to do an investigation on every single one of them, right? They told us that by using this firewall, that's going to reduce that time spent with a full-time team by 95%. Think about that. That's huge, right? But at the end of the day, yes, if you've got a huge organization with thousands of accounts, many teams using it, just exacerbates the problem and it makes writing policies by hand almost impossible. Almost impossible. And that's where you get that scenario where I told you that Fortune 1000 that we worked with just said EC2 start. Because there's so many different projects, there's so many different teams. We don't know, and we don't have the time to figure it all out. So, we're just going to kind of watch it from afar. But don't do anything stupid, right? So that's where you get in those situations where folks they just say, you know what, we're going to accept the risk, and that's unacceptable to me. There's just a better way to do it. So, great question.
All right. Well, before we close out, I just want to remind everyone there is a survey at the top of it's pinned at the top of the chat. It's also in the handout section. We want to hear your feedback. All of your input is invaluable to us. It helps us shape our future programs. Anything that we've got going on here at TechStrong Learning is based around what you guys want to hear from us. So please fill that out. It also helps Sunry with their long-term plans and everything else that Jeff's got going on as well. As a reminder, this is recorded. We will send you a link to the recording shortly after we end the session today. Jeff, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's been a pleasure having you. And
my pleasure. If anyone wants to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat. I'm here to help.
Absolutely. And to go along with that, we want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us and ask all of these great questions and keep Jeff engaged. With that, I'm going to close out. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next TechStrong Learning.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.